very esteemed dignitaries and past scientists of our institute, all my colleagues and everyone else who is here. Let me at the outset tell you what an honor it is to have all of you here. And I was wondering, why do I need to speak at all? Because you have really heard words of wisdom from people I would consider as the true visionaries, people who actually started these disciplines. You can see the kind of excitement they must have felt when they did things for the first time, and how difficult it must have been, what kind of tenacity they had to show. I was also struck when they all spoke by how outstanding their communication skills are. Each one of them speaks so well. Each one of them has such a clarity of purpose. And I think that is what made this institute what it is. Let me at the outset tell you that no institute can survive or can do well if it does not build on the work of all those who worked before them. And that's what makes institutes great. You will see companies which last for hundreds of years. You will see some companies perish in a few years. And I think it is this that differentiates between an outstanding organization and one that it isn't. What I can tell you is that at the time that I took over in this institute in 1999, I realized what a great set of visionaries must have led this institute of ours. And I asked myself, is there really any need to change the vision of the institute? And the answer was a clear no. I said, over the many years, they have really shown, and not all at the same time, gradually, introducing new areas, new disciplines, and all in perfect harmony. What I did think is that maybe some areas which may not have received the kind of attention that should have been received, or for whatever reason they withered away, that maybe we should try and again revive them. Maybe also that new scientific techniques have come into light which may not have been available at that time, and therefore there is room to maybe modernize those areas. For example, introducing molecular biology when we might have been working on classical biology. So it is that kind of, I will say, additions which really were what was required. But otherwise, this institute had such an outstanding, extraordinary vision that only if you're foolish, you'll want to change it. What I also want to say is that people work very hard. I'm sure all the way from 1954, people have worked. They would have taken things to a certain place. For whatever reason, people might have got stuck on a problem, or the priorities could have changed, and so they moved on to do something else. But there was enough of a learning that was already present on which one could build. And to me it appeared that that is what presents the greatest opportunity to this institute, so that one might be able to deliver some results of a tangible nature in a relatively short time frame. Because I think patience was running thin. People just did not want to hear of open-ended work, all of which we are not very clear what it will happen at the end of the day. You have to have your eggs in several baskets. Some of it will be very exploratory, and some of it has got to be much more tangible and focused. What was also very clear was that I don't think you can always have what we would call a technology push, that is, scientists deciding what is good for the country. I think that there is a need to listen to others, and I believe that you heard a few examples of this kind of listening to others, which was beneficial, and what happened was that probably people got a bit more focused in their work. So one of the other things was that can we just interact a bit more? The third was that we all tend to work sometimes in isolation, and disciplines, groups, they become too guarded about their work. In fact, I was quite intrigued to know that actually the concept of discipline did not exist in our institute for quite some time. That what you had were schemes, and a scheme was a good idea, and many people might have contributed to that good idea. You don't need to have a discipline, and sometimes a discipline can thwart the realization of a scheme. And I think that this kind of a compartmentalization, I don't know why it happens, but believe it or not, it happens. It's not that it only happens in our institute, it happens everywhere. And how we can really break those watertight compartments is what all about, what technology development is sometimes all about. What I will do is that I will take you through some glimpses of achievements. I believe that some of these have already been touched upon by some of my other colleagues. So obviously I will not cover those, I will just skip those. But let me go to the next slide. Now, just so that you might be able to compare some of the people, our senior scientists who are superannuated may not know exactly what it is in the institute today. Let me tell you that first and foremost, in terms of our vision, I think the vision is very clear. We want to be a laboratory which is vibrant and visionary in the areas of its mandate, which works with a clear sense of purpose and has a strong set of values. That's very important to us. Second is that it is not just enough to utter what would be called as motherhood statements if you do not have a measurement criteria. You must be able to measure whether you have done well or not so well. And the measurement criteria that we wanted to use, what others may judge us by, are our ability to attract the best manpower, utilize such manpower efficiently, and work well in teams. That's very important. We wanted to show that working in Bhavnagar is not a disadvantage. People saying that it's very far, difficult, not at all. That if the organization is vibrant, people will just flock to it. Second, our ability to attract funds from non-CSIR sources, because if you are completely dependent on a single source of funding, you become very vulnerable, even if it's government funding, because governments can change their priorities. Third, our innovativeness as judged by intellectual property. That's a very, very clear, quantifiable parameter. Our competency in technology development as gauged by technology licensing. It's not enough to say, I have developed technology. One must be able to make sure that it goes for the larger good. Our ability to pursue in-depth research and as measured by publications and generation of underpinning knowledge relevant to our technologies. You would find that in many cases, papers and technologies do not go hand in hand. East is east and west is west, and the two don't meet necessarily. What we said is that you must try and do the most outstanding work in areas that matter. There are so many things. You might actually have developed the technology long before you understand why it works, and I'll give you one or two examples of that. And that's the kind of thing where the science comes in. And 6, what has always been, I think, the greatest strength of our institute, our contributions to society and towards human resource development. It's very, very important. Human resource development, if you ask me, I think it gets overlooked, but CSIR laboratories, the role that it has played in generating manpower, which has been utilized by industries, which have been utilized overseas, is just phenomenal. Who counts it? And I believe that that's one of the great contributions of CSIR, which one cannot ignore. Now, just to give you an idea of, it takes money to run an institute. And just to, what I thought I'll do is compare 2 decades. The decade from the Golden Jubilee to the Diamond Jubilee, 2004 to 2014, and 1994 to 2004. So you've got 2 decades. Can we just try to compare and see what things are like? If you see the total cumulative amount of money that we received from CSIR during that decade, 1994 to 2004, it was about 96 crores. And we got close to about 18 crores as money which we earned from non-CSIR sources. So you get some idea of what we are talking about in terms of a ratio. What you have in 2004 to 2014 is about a figure of 305, roughly about a factor of 3, more or less keeping pace with inflation. What you have is an earning which perhaps has increased to some extent. So you are talking about around, I will say, 25%. Of the ratio would be about roughly 1:4 between funding from other sources and funding from CSIR. This does not take into account the cost of pension. When you add that, the figures change, and all the ratios look far less attractive. If you look at scientific manpower, this is also quite interesting. The number of scientists today, and this is March 2014, we are talking about today, and we are comparing it with March 2004, just at the end when the Golden Jubilee celebrations were to take place. The number of scientists is about the same, but they are not the same scientists. Scientists have retired, new scientists have joined. So you will see many new faces. Let me also tell you that ours is perhaps one of 2 or 3 labs, if not the only one, where CSIR has actually increased our manpower, scientific manpower, from 110 to 140. So it's happened on the back of good performance. Obviously, you can see that we are a long way from that figure. So you're talking about a huge opportunity to recruit something close to about 50, 60 scientists. Can you imagine the kind of transformation that can happen if one were to be able to recruit wisely? But on the other hand, where will they work? Where's the space? So obviously, there's a huge amount of infrastructure that will have to be created in line with this kind of a recruitment. If you look at technical manpower, that's actually declined to some extent from 135 to 115. Non-technical manpower has also declined, 71 to 49. What has risen? What has risen is the number of project personnel. And these are research scholars, other people who come under projects, and that number has risen by more than 2.5 times. And the ability to attract very good project personnel, the number as well as the quality has led to a sea change in the performance of this institute. Obviously, when you are having a large number of research personnel, what it also means is that you've got to have scientists who are capable of guiding them. So obviously, it's very important that if you want to maintain a ratio, the kind of scientific manpower that you require, the kind of project personnel you require, all has to be very nicely planned. These are what I will say are the inputs, the people that you require, the money that you require, and I think CSIR has been very generous to us. I hope you go around our analytical facilities and you see the beautiful equipments that we have, and it's all been possible because of the funding that we receive. But those are all inputs. What about output? Next slide. Okay, 1994 to 2004, we had 2 inventions which were protected by either a US or a European patent. 2004 to 2014, the patents is the one below, that number is 58. Okay. So you can see a dramatic rise in the patenting by the institute, and obviously any patents, and I am talking about granted patents, obviously there is an induction time, it takes time to do the work, then to file a patent and then to have the patent granted. But what you can see is a very, very important number. If you look at royalty and license fee, we were at about 0.78 crore from 1994 to 2004. 2004 to 2014, that figure is 4.76. It's not necessarily because of much more licensing activity. There is significant licensing activity, but I think also to realize a little more money for our licenses. You have someone like Mr. Abhiram Seth, who is here, who has licensed several technologies from us. And I can tell you that nobody in industry is just going to give you money without a hard negotiation. And it's very, very important that we understand the criticality of licensing, because at the end of the day, this is what adds value to the nation. Number of PhDs awarded, 1994 to 2004, 41, 2004 to 14, 113, more than a factor of 3. And I believe that a huge amount of work has actually happened on the back of these PhDs. What we do have to see though is that, and I address this to the students directly, that please make sure, like Dr. Kane was saying, that you are not just working and publishing for the heck of it. How does your work really link up with what we want to do? Is it connected? Papers, which again is linked up with the kind of PhDs generated and everything else, what you can see is that there are 2 figures there. One is the figure of the number of publications per year, and the other is what is known as the impact factor, the average impact factor of the journals we publish in. What you can see is that from around 2001, impact factor data became available. In 2004, we had an impact factor of 2.35, that is 3.23 today, but you can also see how the absolute number of publications has increased. That is basically what I will say the sum and substance of what exactly is the change which is the change from the golden to the diamond. Next slide. What I must also tell you is that we have created for ourselves, I don't want you to read all this, what I would call a balanced scorecard. Any institute must be able to judge itself based on your scorecard, just like if you're in school. How did you do in the various subjects? So how did you do in terms of the inputs? How did you do in terms of the output? And in a single slide, one must be able to put, just like a report card is also one piece of paper. And at the end of the day, if, let me tell you, 37 labs of CSIR each can provide a one page of a gem, nobody will stop anyone's funding. But if people start questioning what is there in that, then you have problems. Next slide. Dr. Shukla already mentioned, in the previous decade, the decade of 94 to 2004, I think one of the finest contributions was the zeolite A technology license to NALCO. It's tremendous that we have been able to license that technology in Gujarat now, and a plant is going to come up anywhere between 10,000 ton and 25,000 ton, for which I think the detailed engineering is presently on. But what is very significant is that two companies have formed a joint venture on the basis of this technology, and that is GMDC and Credo Minerals. So that's what makes it very exciting. Let me also tell you that while it all sounds very nice, it was a very difficult process, not very easy to actually sort out all the technical issues which were required to be solved for this to become a viable technology. In fact, there was a time when it appeared that we'll have to return the money. But I think that that's where the outstanding brilliance of our scientists comes in, that they were able to take the problem head on and address the various problems, and finally actually have such a wonderful technology that nobody can ever refuse. Next slide. Let me also tell you what exactly is meant by inventing in seemingly mature technologies, because this is one of the areas in which the institute has tried to focus very hard. If someone says salt, can you do something really dramatically different in salt? That's the issue. You can change of the rules of the game which one has tried to address. The general view in salt technology was that the purity of salt is dictated by the composition of brine. So you have subsoil brine, you have sea brine, and they give you different purities of salt because the compositions of the brine are different. Now, once you are stuck with that hypothesis, there's very little you can do because nature has dictated for you that composition. You can't change it. The alternative hypothesis that was posed was that, is that true? What if one says that the purity of salt is dictated by the morphology of crystals, and the morphology of crystals in turn is controlled by other factors? And if you can understand those factors, maybe you can control the morphology of crystals and in turn the quality of the salt. That's exactly what was done, And again you have to ask yourself, what factors are within your control? Some things are not within your control. The two factors that we found which were within our control, one was the clarity of the brine and the second was the pH of the brine. By actually understanding this, we were able to change the morphology of the crystals and prevent the gluing up of salt crystals because the impurities actually were residing in between the crystals. And effectively, what this meant is that even from subsoil brine, today you can make salt with a purity greater than 99%. That's no problem. That's what was licensed to Grasim and on which the US patent was granted. One patent year before last and one patent last year. You know. What I wanted to tell you is that, but at the same time, had this institute not had the capability, the competency to work on salt, you could not have done anything. And that's where the greatness of all those who have worked in the past comes in. Next slide. Let me take you to another. It made quite a sensation. I don't know why the end gets cut off. I mean, is there any reason? Just see. No? Okay, don't worry. Okay. But, you know, and it actually came from a discussion. I mentioned to you how important it is to talk to people to decide what kind of work we should do. And in fact, we had a meeting with Hindustan Lever, and what we agreed was that the two most important traits of a good quality salt for edible consumption, one is the whiteness of the salt, and the second is the flowability of the salt. And at that time, a radical thinking came to us, which was that, can you make the salt spherical? And the first technology that was developed was based on the use of an additive which converts it into a dodecahedron, and later on, purely by mechanical action, one was able to make the spheres, and those spheres could be made for subsoil brine, pure sodium chloride sea brine. And what they did is that the first application it found in was not in edible application at all. It was actually in a medical application. If you have the slide, can you just play the video once again, if you can? If you watch the thing in the middle, that's the one which is spherical, and that's what it does. And effectively, there are huge opportunities now to apply this kind of method. Making a spherical salt is per se quite well known. The issue is how to make it in that particular size range, which is so important for these kinds of applications. Next slide. Take another example of a bread and butter product which this institute has worked on, bromine. We all know how important bromine is. We also know, some of us will know, that bromine is actually produced by two different technologies. One is the steaming out process. Both of them use chlorine, but in one, you steam it out at high temperature, and in the other case, you blow it with air, and that's the air blowing technology. In the air blowing technology, one then collects the bromine vapors in an alkali and makes a bromide-bromate couple, and then that bromide-bromate is reacidified to make bromine. What it appeared to us is that nobody actually wants bromine. You only want the job to be done by bromine. So you want bromo compounds. Nobody cares whether it's bromine, and bromine is a terrible chemical to handle. And this whole technology is based on basically realizing that this intermediate from the air blowing process, instead of it being acidified to form bromine and then carting it around, why not do that acidification at the time of the experiment of bromination, to make the bromo compound. And that is what today is known as green bromine. Let me also tell you that there is a litigation going on today in Israel of us with a multinational, and basically they have already conceded our right to have a patent. What they wanted us to do was concede a bit in our claims, even that we have refused, so So it's gone to the court, and let us wait for the verdict. But you can see, it's all about taking the great work which this institute did and trying to add a little value. Next slide. Take potash. As you would have seen from what Mr. Gandhi read out of what Dr. Gomkale wrote, this institute has done phenomenal work on potash. But at the end of it, we struggled. We were not able to quite commercialize because of some difficulty or the other. What one needs to do is understand what those difficulties are and is there a way to crack it. If there is no way to crack it, then you're stuck. Right? And this is one of those great examples where our back was to the wall. There was a huge amount of money which was given to us by Department of Ocean Development to actually develop a potash technology. And we got some of the money. But for whatever reason, we finally said that we cannot take up the project, and the money had to be refunded back. But still about 45 lakhs was left with us, and we were determined not to return that money, and we said, we will convince them that we will develop this technology. Please don't take away our money. And out of that 45 lakhs was born a fierce determination to come up with a good potash technology. And basically there is a plant of 1 lakh tons which is coming up in the greater run of Kutch, using essentially the framework of the technology which has been licensed by us. Next slide. Take magnesia. I think that there would have been enormous amount of time one would have spent talking about the kind of quality of magnesia that one can get. There was a plant which was set up by the Birla Group, Birla Pericles, which was set up and had to close because they could not make magnesia of the desired quality. The other problem that they had was of lime quality and cost of transportation and various things. That whole thing has completely been transformed by a new technology which uses lime, but uses lime in a contactless process. So what one does is first precipitates magnesium hydroxide with ammonia, and just like in the Solvay process, one regenerates the ammonia with lime. So effectively, you have done the job of lime without the lime coming in contact with the bitter. And with that, you can today make magnesia which is 99.5% pure effortlessly. Don't have to do anything. Next slide. That's also one of the technologies that has been licensed by Tatas in addition to the technology on potash. Next slide. This is what will be inaugurated tomorrow in the salt farm, the SOP test bed, and this is yet another improvement over the technology which was licensed, on which the 1 lakh ton plant is coming up, where an opportunity was found to effectively make 3 products at one go. You are making sulfate of potash, making ammonium sulfate, and also ultra pure magnesia. This is the SOP test bed, and I am absolutely certain that once this technology is demonstrated, at that 0.75 TPD scale, that several people will come and acquire this know-how. We are already in discussions with some of the companies. Next slide. Take for example this technology, another brilliant example of innovation. This was a problem posed by one of the pigment manufacturers, and what they do is they generate a huge amount of waste, and they didn't know what to do with their waste. They were very keen to value add that waste. What that led to was basically the application of the technology which already existed not this part, I am talking about this over here on the right, and effectively the technology of synthetic hydrotalcide, which was developed by the team of scientists here, was applied very successfully, and there is a 1000 TPD, a TPA plant which is come up already, and this is Mr. Hubach inaugurating this plant. Next slide. Take another great example of, and in fact Dr. Anand had referred to is, I believe one of the finest technologies that was developed in our institute by Govindan et al., and that was to make an interpolymer membrane, anion exchange membrane and cation exchange membrane. I think it's a brilliant concept. What they did was that instead of dispersing styrene, divinyl benzene beads into a matrix of polythene, what they did was they instead dispersed the monomer into that polymer, and after that they polymerized. So, what you do is you have a very uniform distribution of one polymer in another. You should also know that what kind of threats can come to a technology. I believe Dr. Anand alluded to it, but not exactly. The biggest threat was that to make the anion exchange membrane, one needed to use a chemical called chloromethyl ether. It's a very toxic chemical which has been banned. So, you can't use it. So, even though you might have the greatest interpolymer, you don't know what to do with it. And this debate was going on for years, 2 decades. Should I do this? Should I do that? The way it has been circumvented is that instead of using styrene, one today uses methyl styrene, and instead of doing chloromethylation, one does benzylic bromination, so that you finally get the same molecule CH2Br connected to the aromatic ring, but you get it by a different route. This is the new technology, and all our efforts in the ion exchange membrane division is really about getting this technology off the ground and commercializing this technology. Let me also tell you that a great example of 2 disciplines working together, first under the leadership of Mr. Vijay Shah, and subsequently recognizing the importance of critical things like modeling. How can you simulate the flows, etc. So you know how exactly a unit works, and basically this is the ultra pure water unit which has been developed called 18E6 omega, which is 18 mega ohm. Next slide. Amazing foresight that our RO division way back thought about not only working on RO, but actually working also on hollow fiber membrane. But again, I think we need to differentiate between finally, what is it that finally leads to technology. This is a very good example, where over the period of time, huge improvements were made in the way the membranes are made, the hollow fibers are made. You can see a single fiber there, how many fibers you can pack into a module, and most importantly, how do you control the pores, and how do you control not only the size of pores, but the density of pores, so that you get sufficient flux and you can ensure that the bacteria and the virus will be rejected with that log 6, log 4 kind of a reduction. For those who may not know, this technology is already commercialized, and already the company is talking to big players like Eureka Forbes, Hindustan Lever, others, and hopefully it will proliferate in a very big way. Next slide. Again, I think I was fascinated listening to the presentations on RO membrane, and I think you should applaud the work that was done by all these great people in actually getting the discipline off the ground. Not just getting it off the ground, but actually producing units which worked. How brilliant they were. The thin film composite membrane, which initially Dr. Rangarajan and Dr. N.V. Desai, I don't know if he's here, he's right there, they started working on, and then later on, Mr. Vijay Shah took forward further, is something that we are extremely proud of, and I've written over there, tireless efforts of many staff over 2 decades. But what is very gratifying is that just in this year, 2014, the commercialization has taken place, and the first indigenous manufacture of thin film composite RO membrane in our country has begun. The plant was inaugurated by Mr. Kirloskar, Sanjay Kirloskar, and it's set up in Pune. Let me also tell you the huge amount of effort that was made by our scientists to actually develop all those technologies which ultimately allow not only a membrane to be made, but the whole module to be made at domestic level, 4-inch diameter, 8-inch diameter. And today, the complete technology is there. So if people are talking about DuPont and Dow, no longer true, India has entered. And we have entered at the right time, because otherwise you would get completely swamped by China. I was so happy that as recently as 2 days back, we got the data on the commercial results, from the 8-inch module, and what you have is spectacular flux, far superior than what you'll get even for the commercial modules, with very, very nominal compromise in the rejections. And I think that this is one area that we will need to start becoming more aggressive in, and that is, we should not only fall for what specifications and things other people are dictating. Set your own specifications. I keep telling this as the chairman of the Chemical Division Council of Bureau of Indian Standards. I say, why are we not making our own specifications? Who said that 99.5% salt rejection efficiency is required? Rubbish, not required. People need more water. So you have to change the rules of the game. And I think as scientists, we'll have to learn not only how to do good science, but how to influence strategically. That's going to be very, very important if we want in the coming decades to really move ahead. Next slide. The institute, I believe, has really made its mark over the last 40-50 years in the area of societal work. What I would like to assure you is that there has been no let up in that activity, because this was something that you all have done extraordinarily well. What I can tell you is that we have probably, I think, gone a bit ahead in terms of the total impact that can possibly be made. So, for example, 25 plants have been set up in Afghanistan. Can you imagine our people going to Afghanistan, our technicians from here, and going and setting it up, they had a gun with them, if required, and that's the kind of gutsy people that you have in CSMCRI. You have the world's first animal-powered reverse osmosis unit, which is today been granted a US patent, is covered internationally, and I believe is one of the inventions that created quite a stir all over the world. You have the first community-scale solar-driven RO unit, producing roughly about 600-700 liters per hour. You have the mobile unit, lots of work on mobile, but going all around. I've shown you the picture after the cyclone in 2009, but let me tell you just last year, with 2 major calamities, Cyclone Phylline and Himalayan tsunami, the people were active, and they used to sleep in the bus. That is the kind of commitment that these people have. Based on the work that Mr. Pathak and his group did, the Rajasthan government sanctioned 60 plants to be set up in Rajasthan. Can you imagine? And all those 60 plants are actually being put up. I believe 35, 40 have already been dispatched. And also, I think it's very important to ask daring questions. Let me tell you one example. Seawater desalination. The basic thing was, you guys, as chota mota bachchas, don't try to get into seawater desalination. आप थोड़ा गांव में जाके प्लांट लगा दीजिए, सी वाटर आप करने मत जाइए. It's somebody else's cup of tea. And why? Because seawater requires 99.5% or 3% rejection, and you don't have that, so how can you enter? So we said, is there only one way to do something? What's so holy about in one pass that you have to desalinate seawater? Just do it in 2 passes and show that you can get advantages in some other way. In this particular case, we said that advantage will be that I'll have a higher flux and I'll operate at a lower pressure. What was the problem? Today we can make better quality water than any of those guys can, just by adopting 2-stage seawater desalination. Common sense. But if you get stuck in a mindset, that that's the only way to do it, you cannot. So I think that the need for all of us to be daring, to ask questions, so what? Rubbish. There's more than one way to do something. And I would like to leave that message. It's not got only to do with desalination. Believe me, across the board, in everything that you do, ask daring questions. Next slide. Another wonderful piece of work that the Institute did, probably something that we are extremely proud of, which is that converting mine water into drinking water. And this has happened in Rajasthan, where they said impossible, you won't be able to do it. And what we were able to do is that with a 70% recovery, we could convert the water coming out from the lignite mine, the highly saline 10,000 ppm water, into drinking water. A plant has been set up of 20 MLD capacity, subsequently, and believe me, every day 100 tankers produce water and supply it to villages all around. And it's all happened when you saw, you said Rajasthan, on the one hand there's no water, and on the other hand plenty of water is coming out from the ground. How can you say that it's not going to be useful? Next slide. I would like to also, as part of society, say that it's not always that one has to work for very large companies. One can work in the MSME sector, and I think there is a huge room, and this is one area that we would like to focus increasingly more on, because these people actually have no R&D support. Big companies have their own R&D, but who supports the MSME sector? Simple work and no great intellect, nothing. Basically showing people how to manage, how to conserve heat better, how to minimize losses. And what has that overall done? Overall, there is a 51.7% savings in the energy to make essential oil. How much effort did it take? Well, it took several committed scientists, and I would say it would have taken maybe about 1 month of each of their efforts. But it's a huge impact. And I think that these are the kinds of things, and not things that go on for years, We're talking about in 1 year from start to finish. The job is over. Next slide. Solar energy was the one area I think we feel very bad that this institute was a real pioneer. I think that, solar thermal meant CSMCRI. And somewhere down the line, Of course, it was a global phenomenon, but somehow we started chasing other fashions, and in the process, we kind of dissipated our capability. And what I saw was, I think some of the brightest guys were in solar, and one saw frustration in them, that here we are, the solar people, and look, today we can't do anything, And what we have tried to do is revive that, but revive that with great focus, And that focus is that one, most of the reasons why people have not succeeded with solar energy is that we have not really seen through all the difficulties of using solar energy. We have only been talking about the advantages of using it, not the disadvantages. And I think it's very important that while addressing a problem, that one looks at not just all the good things about it, but what is not good about it. And for example, if there are cloudy days, there's nothing so great about it. And so you can straight away see that probably hybrid technologies may be a better option as far as solar is concerned than having a very, very singular focus on solar energy. And one of the other things is that think small as far as solar is concerned, look for decentralized solutions, and where, for example, we have worked on solar still, but if you take good water and make it better water, you don't get that much of credit. Take seawater and make drinking water and tell people, show me one domestic unit that exists for seawater desalination by RO. Zero. Show me a unit that exists for electrodialysis of seawater in domestic. Zero. So what are you talking about? Obviously, positioning a technology is very, very important. So when we are, for example, today looking at solar, a solar still, we are looking at it basically for seawater desalination. And also, all the other ways in which you can improve the efficiency of the unit, for example, by putting reflectors, so that much more light, much more radiation falls on the still. This is the new transformation that solar energy is today being used also for chemical reactions, and one sees a golden opportunity to do many interesting chemical reactions with solar energy. Next slide. Biodiesel. It would never have been possible but for collaboration. I think the visionary called Dr. Iyengar and others, even they went to Mexico, they talked to people, and then they came up and said, maybe I can do something. Right? But you have got to be aware. But even that was not enough. What you needed is the drive of a company and a drive of a visionary company. That visionary company for us was Mercedes-Benz. Who could be luckier than us, to have had Mercedes-Benz from Germany wanting to work with us? How did it happen? That is where the greatness of CSIR comes in. That CSIR has programs like the DART program, under which scientists are exchanged. And we had people from Germany who were exchanged over here. And when they came, they said, hey, you have done some work on Getrofa. And you have people like Mr. Pandya, who then capitalized and took things forward. Absolutely brilliant. And the seesaw, that first you were in cultivation, later on we ended up making very good quality biodiesel, people forgot about cultivation, and after that you ask, wait a minute, what's the point in having good technology for making biodiesel if I can't generate seeds? So go back to cultivation, and that's the total link. You can see that starting from Mercedes 2004, which Mr. Gandhi mentioned, and I must pay tribute to all of them, that they were able to convert concepts into scale up. It's not easy. You might have an idea in the lab and do things, but to take it and say that I have to make 1,000 liters, it's not easy. And whether it is how wonderful it felt to have all the buses in the Gir forest running with this. And our latest is that we are tying up with Indian Railway, and 2 trains will be running from Ahmedabad to Gandhidham on 10% CSMCI biodiesel. And it's a wonderful feeling that all the defense vehicles are being tested on our fuel. The Indian Railways will be working with us, and I hope all of this will give the kind of impetus that is required to finally to be able to take Jatropha and do something big with it. Next slide. At the end of it, it's all about cultivation, and it's all about those work that you did of trying to improve the germplasm. And I think that point you made is so sensible, that these are not domesticated. You have to put in a huge amount of effort to domesticate. So don't be negative about it. Others have gone through a huge amount of effort to domesticate some of those other crops. So please put in that effort and try to domesticate. Next slide. You can see wonderful work with General Motors subsequently on doing a life cycle analysis. I don't want to go into this. Next slide. I thought I will share with you something that happened last year and something that gave us great joy. After Cyclone Philin, the entire plantation in Gujarat, in Odisha, wiped out. You can see all the trees toppled over. And we could have taken a view, What we said is, and when everybody is in disarray, you can imagine in Odisha, there's no vehicle, there's nothing, the roads are blocked, What we decided is, we will not let this plantation die. And we said, go and get people from wherever you can, pay them whatever they need to be paid. We want those trees back on their feet. And within week to 10 days, 5,000 plants were straightened out. And they're all doing well now. So I think that, is no point losing hope, no point saying after everything is over, we could have done that. To be able to act in real time is very, very important. And this is the action in real time. Next slide. I was delighted to hear the origin of the marine algae discipline. I thought it was seaweed. It's not. It's microalgae. And it was chlorella. And those red micro algae in the salt works in Rajasthan. And that was the origin of the marine algae discipline. It's amazing that today we are talking about the same thing, chlorella. It's amazing what kind of extraordinary vision Mr. Kapanna and others must have had. You've got to salute them. What kind of visionary people were these? The only difference is that what perhaps people were wanting to do at that time was a high value product but low volume. And today what we are looking at is low value, high volume. How do you make the transformation? I was so happy that just today Adani Power, who have set up the largest power plant in our country, 500 megawatt, 5,000 megawatt, is tying up with us. And basically the idea is to take Dr. Sandhya Mishra's work forward and to be able to now use the CO2 flue gas emissions coming out from their power plant and to see if that might increase the availability of CO2 and consequently photosynthesis. And all of this, the only other difference is everything that we do is with the marine chlorella. We are not working with fresh water because there is no fresh water. So I think that look at it, what transpired or what happened between 1964 and 2014. 50 years has gone by. It's chlorella. What is the two difference? From high value, low volume to high volume, low value. and from fresh water to marine. That's basically it, and a few other innovations around it. But the joy that is basically given us the first biodiesel in the world, the first microalgal biodiesel, marine microalgal biodiesel, which ran a car. That's someone who is no more, Mr. Vilasrao Deshmukh. Next slide. Why do so many CSIR labs exist? Are we networking with them? I thought I will give you one example of a network where Indian Institute of Petroleum is actually doing all of the engine testing with our biodiesel, and the first comparative data has been generated in the world comparing the Jethrofa biodiesel, the microalgal biodiesel, and fossil diesel. And what do you see? That these are exceptionally good fuels. Next slide. You heard the great man, Dr. O.P. Mayer, and this is what he was talking about. That one strand of seaweed which has given rise to those thousands and thousands of tons of Kappa ficus alvarezi, which Mr. Abhiram said has been able to do. The great man that he is left his job as an executive director of Pepsi and started his own company to take it forward. But he wouldn't be able to do it if Dr. O.P. Mayer had not done that. And that's where vision comes in. Do I have the ability to think long term? You mean to say that what all these people did is irrelevant today? That's what we are building on. If they did not have the RO discipline and all the work, what would we be doing? Nothing. That's your greatness. If you didn't do salt, all those things that you did, what would we be able to do? Nothing. So it's all a sense of continuity. Next slide. And what is Mr. Abhiram Seth doing? It's all being marketed by the Tatas under the Paras brand. A simple invention. Just as I have explained to you other inventions, let me explain this also. That normally in the world, seaweed used to be brought to the coast and then it used to be dried. And you take the dry seaweed, send it to the factory, and process it. What did we do? We said there is more than one way to remove water. And basically what we did was that by crushing the seaweed, because the seaweed has about 95% moisture, we were able to liquefy the seaweed. So something that looks like a solid suddenly looks like a liquid. And you filter it, get the liquid, get the solid, solid gives you carrageenan, liquid becomes a booming biofertilizer. That is the technology. And why suddenly the cost of the seaweed, why a farmer today gets, how much, 35 rupees a kg? Whereas earlier it was 3 rupees a kg. That's the transformation of technology and the power of innovation. Next slide. The greatness of CSIR and the Indian organizations is that we have all the capability in the world. And this is one program where 43 research institutes, agricultural institutes across India are working with Arup Ghosh as the nodal scientist, and they are all evaluating that sap for 9 different crops. And what do you find? Anything between 10 and 35, 40% is the yield increase that has happened because of this. Where does the science come in? It's all very well. I mean, yes, I've got yield, but why? What magical substance exists in this liquid that gives you this yield? And for the last 6 to 7 years, that work is going on. What is there in it and how does it correlate with growth? That's the science. Next slide. I thought, I wish Dr. Krishnamurthy was here, and he was talking about the backbreaking efforts of Mrs. Thivi and others, when they were producing agar. Why was it backbreaking and why was it difficult? Because you had a very tiny amount of the gum in a lot of water, and then you had to freeze the water, and then you had to thaw that thing, drain out the water, repeat that process 3 times, and that's how you got agar. What we said is that, is it possible to do it in a radically different way? And that radically different way is that, can I add a chemical into that thing and automatically the agar will settle out? And basically that is the interaction between surfactants and agar that we were able to demonstrate, and that's the latest technology with Mr. Abhiram Seth has acquired from us, and I hope he becomes the greatest producer of agarose, not just in our country, but in the world. That's Meena there, the great man who actually made it happen. Let me also tell you that it is not true that the costliest thing is the hardest to process, or the most valuable thing, like diamond. You polish it more and more, and it becomes more and more costly. It so happens in this case that the phaltu things don't work. Agar doesn't work, but agarose works. So this technology is married to agarose. And the cost savings, the energy savings, is just mind-boggling. Next slide. I thought I will mention about the Marine Environment Group. The Marine Environment Group has been extremely active, looking at, for example, Dr. Kane's visionary project on Kalpasar, and what will it do? Like, for example, if you are going to transform, from a saline environment to a freshwater environment over 10 years, what happens in between to the animals and the flora and the fauna? Who knows it? That's where science comes in. That's where studies come in. That's the role of environment. Next slide. I also must tell you that I think it's important to give 1 or 2 important examples of application of science, before I close off. In fact, what was mentioned by Professor Taqi Khan on the goiter problems and the work that they did, one of the problems is that if someone were to adulterate salt, not with iodide, but with something else, I can still get a positive iodine test. And in our country, is there a shortage of chores? How do you know people won't do it? And you need a foolproof method which goes beyond iodometric titration, so that nobody can cheat. And that's the technique of ion chromatography which has been introduced, where you simply cannot cheat because there is a fingerprint for iodate. So if you substitute with something else, you won't get the signal. Next slide. Dr. Anand's a great example, I think one of the finest pieces of work, that if you can have the simplicity of a pH paper, and put it in water and say the water has X, Y, and Z in approximately this concentration, what is there any science or any chemistry that anyone knows that's better than that? And that's what he has been able to do with arsenic. I hope you are able to do it with others. That's the power of good work. Next slide. I just thought I should tell you that these impact factor of publications have come from certain papers which have been published in very high impact factor journals. This is, for example, a paper that has been published in Angiochemy. It's one of the highest impact factor journals, And basically, it's a theoretical study which showed how a morphology of salt crystal can deviate from a cube and become a dodecahedron or an octahedron, depending on the kind of pH control, etc., that you exercise. Next slide. This is another great paper. Everyone would have heard of the Journal of the American Chemical Society, one of the finest journals in chemistry, and some of these people have been able to carry out some spontaneous resolution of optically active compounds. It's a wonderful piece of work. Next slide. This is another. This journal put this picture on their cover page for all the issues that year. Not one issue, all the issues. And what was it about? It was about a study which was done on a salt-tolerant rhizobacterium which was isolated from Salicornia, and which seems to be important for nitrogen fixing. I think that, for example, Dr. Iyengar, it would have been very difficult to do some of this study during your time, even if you wanted to, because you didn't have the instruments. You never had, but today we have. And so we are able to do it. Next slide. A beautiful book, and I think that the institute must also be known, just like everybody refers to the classic work, the first compilation of the seaweeds of India by Krishnamurti and Joshi. Everybody will refer to it as a Bible. The only difference is that classical taxonomy has been supplemented with molecular biology as a means of characterization, so that some of the ambiguity that exists otherwise is gone. I think that that's a great piece of work. And the second is that it is all based on primary data. It is not based on taking something from one book, and putting it. Every photograph there is verified, as a photograph, from something that you've actually recorded. Next slide. The environment group again, all the good things that we have talked about, seaweed cultivation, but I know how Mr. Abhiram said, and everybody else and myself, how we have got hell, and we have got hell simply because everybody was trying to show us that we are damaging the environment. And therefore, to be able to study, the environment and to do it in a very scientific manner is vitally important. And we have to do many more of such work and always safeguard, so that you are not only talking about all the good things about what we do, but what are the likely threats. Next slide. Lots of media interest in our work, and it's relentless. That man over there, Mr. Carl Slim, was the managing director of General Motors, who, as you know, committed suicide, by jumping off from a hotel in Thailand, and but that was the pioneering MOU which was signed to do the first life cycle analysis of Jatropha, all the way from cultivation to making biodiesel. Next slide. Well, as I've said, we have come a long way, but there is now great expectation from the institute and much that remains to be accomplished in the years ahead. I would like to thank all staff, past and present, and not just permanent staff. Our research scholars, our project assistants, they're all our staff. They all contribute towards the overall growth of the institute. All our administration, where are they? All the people in the workshop, all the people in IT cell. Their contributions are all silent and taken for granted. Without them, you can't do anything. And so they are very, very valuable people, whom you must admire and appreciate. And all the contributions that they have made to the success of the institute in diverse ways are gratefully acknowledged. And finally, thank you.